we've had the star of this movie on Dueling Decades several times over the years.
Dueling Decades.
Yeah. All right, duelers. Well, this game is all tied up, and we're heading into our first 2-point round. Mike Ranger, you have control of the board. Where are we going? Music or movies?
Oh, I think we're going to go with music, Mark. All right. So released in 1986 by IRS Records was a soundtrack that Discogs.com claims falls under the alternative rock, new wave, psychobilly style. The music, much like this motion picture, certainly has a style all its own, and like its predecessor, is completely different from the first film. I give you the official motion picture soundtrack to Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. The album was released on both vinyl and cassette, featuring 10 tracks from the likes of Lords of the New Church, The Cramps, Timbuk 3, Stuart Copeland, Concrete Blonde, Torch Song, and Oingo Boingo, who seem to find themselves on a few soundtracks in the mid-1980s. So drop the needle on this 1986 sound journey while you still can, because like Oingo Boingo says, no one lives forever.
All right, Mancrush, what did you bring for the music round?
All right, so let's go to July 30th of 1982. And here's a movie we've talked about it on the show before. Matter of fact, we've had the star of this movie on Dueling Decades several times over the years. So go check those out. I don't know. The episodes are in our catalog, I think, last summer.
You can find them all on duelingdecades.com.
Exactly. Go to duelingdecades.com. There's a search function there, and you'll know what I'm talking about by the end. I'm sure Mark already knows where I'm going with this. But anyway, when it comes to teenage sex comedies, the 80s were like the golden age. And it's sad because we'll never have another period like that ever again. Honestly, like teenage sex comedy like that in itself is a thing of the past. Like after American Pie, that whole franchise, the genre was basically flushed entirely. And I watched some of the teen comedy movies in nowadays, like with my daughter, and they're so out of touch with being a teen that it's just like, what? But that being said, like a lot of the teenage sex comedies of the golden era that we're talking about are pretty outlandish and also out of touch. But this particular movie was probably the most authentic of those teenage sex comedies. At least I think so. I think a lot of people don't see it that way. But this film, it was basically what being a teen was all about in the 80s. And the star of the film herself, she echoed the sentiments to us when she was on the episode. She said the same thing. That's what growing up in the 80s was like. So like one of the things that put the cousins, talking about Golan and Globus, that put them on the map, both globally and monetarily, was the movie Lemon Popsicle. And just to put it in perspective, in 1978, there were roughly 4 million people living in Israel. And that was when Lemon Popsicle was released. And they sold roughly 1.3 million tickets to see that movie. So I'm not a mathematician, but that's nearly like what, 1/4 of the entire population of Israel at that time. That's fucking insane. And to this day, it appears that Lemon Popsicle is the highest grossing Israeli movie of all time. I couldn't find anything else. I don't know. I'm sure they don't have like a million movies coming out of there, but the movie killed it. So in spite of that success, this movie, it gained lots of attention and made lots of money outside of Israel. However, it never gained much traction in the United States. So anyhow, like Golan and Globus, they knew they needed to get to Hollywood. They used copious amounts of money that they made from Lemon Popsicle. Of course, they purchased a struggling Canon group, and then they decided to redo Lemon Popsicle for the American audience. And that movie would be called Last American Virgin. And of course, who I was talking about before was Diane Franklin. So Karen, which is her name in the movie, but Karen, they bring in Boaz Davidson. They bring him back to direct this movie. And why not? I mean, the movie is basically about his life growing up. So they basically do like this shot for shot American version of Lemon Popsicle. That said, like the one big difference is the time period. So instead of it taking place in the 50s or 60s, which I'm not sure of in Lemon Popsicle, now the movie is going to take place in the 80s. So instead of like Lemon, instead of Little Richard or Bobby Vinton or Paul Anka, they brought in a whole new onslaught of like 80s new wave into the mix. And the funny thing is, like, knowing what I know about the Cousins, having such an amazing soundtrack, it shocks me that they did this, that they paid the money to have this. Because look, the Last American Virgin, the soundtrack features Tommy Two-Tone, The Police, which is a great track, Devo, Oingo Boingo, The Cars, The Who. And you cannot even have an abortion scene without U2 in it. And they did this. They had U2, I Will Follow, playing in the background during an abortion scene. I mean, you can't do it. If you don't have them, you can't do an abortion scene. It's amazing, and the soundtrack's amazing, and it's the soundtrack for Last American Virgin. I mean, I'm sure I left people out of here. I mean, let's see. Phil Seymour was the other person, Gleaming Spires, The Waitresses, and The Fortune Band. But out of those 10 tracks, and I think, Austin, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if I read this in your book or not, but was it Oingo Boingo that they got sued by, that they had to like pull it off, or it was only on the VHS? I know there was one song that was only on the VHS.
Right. I don't remember offhand. It might have been Oingo Boingo, but I'd have
Which
to
is funny if it was, because then they come back to them to do Mike's soundtrack. But
yeah, they were on the Dangerously Close soundtrack as well.
They do everybody's soundtrack.
Yeah.
Which happened. Wasn't Oingo Boingo your first concert, Mark?
No, that was Wang Chung.
Same shit.
Sounds like a dead man's party.
All right, guys. So for my music selection, it's no mystery to Mancrush and to Mike Ranger what I'm going with here. This is such an important album for me personally. You know, this was the album that introduced me to hip hop. It's one of the first albums that I had completely memorized. You know, and after this album, it would lead me to other bands like the Beastie Boys and LL Cool J, and just kind of discovering the complete New York City break scene, which for a fat white kid growing up in northern Maine, that's a completely different universe. So this album would teach me that out on the streets, you don't survive by being weak. And much like here on Dueling Decades, there's no stopping us. No one does it better. This is an album that always reminded me that 99.5, it won't do. I give you Breakin', the original motion picture soundtrack. Now, I'm not sure how this cassette tape got in my possession. I believe it was one of my sisters that I kind of just took, and I wore this thing out so you couldn't even read the text on the tape. It was just a plain white tape. So this album contains the first performance on an album by Ice-T. Now, previously, he had only released like 12-inch singles. So let's take a look at the track listing. It starts off on side A with the one-hit wonder of Ollie and Jerry. Fantastic. They have Breakin', There's No Stopping Us, the title song from the movie, of course. It reached number 9 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100 and number 5 in the U.K. Their second single for the sequel, Electric Boogaloo, that didn't fare as well. So, and then we go to the Barkays with Freak Show on the Dance Floor, Hot Streak, Bodywork, Carolyn Towns with 99.5, an amazing track. Ollie and Jerry gets another song on this one with Showdown. Let's flip it over to side B. 3B, Heart of the Beat. We have Street People by Firefox, Reflex with Cut It, and then the feature for the feature song for this album, Rufus and Shaka Khan with Ain't Nobody, which reached number 1 on the R&B charts and number 22 in the U.S. Billboard Hot 100. This is a song, for me personally, I always go back to. It is one of my all-time favorite jams. And then it ends with Chris the Glove Taylor and Ice-T with Reckless, just cutting it up. Now, this album, it inspired me at a very young age to enter a breakdancing competition, despite the fact that I don't actually know how to breakdance. And the result was my shoe flying off into the crowd during my very first move attempt. So I give you Breakin', the original motion picture soundtrack. And I have my copy of Breaking here on
Nice.
VHS.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Oh boy, these are three really good ones in this category. Three really up there in the upper echelon of canon soundtracks. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 soundtrack it's a very fun one. It's also very expensive nowadays. If you look it
Yes,
up on
it is.
Discogs, a cassette tape just the last week sold for I think $35 on eBay, and I've never seen the actual vinyl for under 100,
Yeah,
which is
yeah, the vinyl's
crazy.
around 100. I think the cheap one is 100, and it's
Yeah.
damaged.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's a gap in my canon soundtrack collection that I can't justify it, but it also makes me a little bitter, thinking that I probably won't ever own the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 soundtrack on vinyl. But yeah, these are all three great ones. This is a hard category to choose, but I have to roll out TCM2 because of that, as much as I enjoy the movie and the songs on its soundtrack. Mancrush, Last American Virgin is incredible. And yeah, Canon put money into this soundtrack. And one of the things that they also sat on the film for a little bit, like
Yep.
not long.
It was like
Canon,
2 years or so, like a year and a half.
Yeah. So by the time it came out, some of these artists had gotten even bigger. U2 is the main example. Is back when they got them for the film, they weren't very well known, and they were much bigger by the time. So they even advertised the soundtrack on the front of the VHS. If we're going for props here, you have all the side listed, all of the artists who are on it, and yeah, the songs are great. The Gleaming Spires is probably one of the lesser known bands on the soundtrack, but they have Are You Ready, Eddie?
for the sex, girls?
Yeah, thank you for singing it so I didn't have to.
Mark can add it to my
I've been
soundtrack.
singing it in my head this whole fucking segment.
Yeah, that's a excellent soundtrack. But
And reused in Revenge of the Nerds. And
Yes.
there was another movie that used it too, I believe, that I heard it before.
Yeah, that's where I know it from, is from the Revenge of the Nerds soundtrack.
yeah, that another band that the teen sex comedies. There's actually I have to promote somebody else's book. There's a book called Teen Movie Hell by Mike McPadden, who sadly passed away last year. But
Oh.
It's actually sitting right behind me.
it's
Right
such
over
a,
Oh,
yeah.
that's
let
when
me
you were
grab
talking
it. Hold on a
about,
second.
Yeah, that's an incredible book, and it goes into the entire history of the teen sex movies, and it's great reviews. Yeah, one hell of a cover. And Mike was very nice too. He blurbed with a Canon Film Guide and gave me some advice. So he was someone who I really admired. He had a earlier book called Heavy Metal Movies that I had fallen in love with, and it came out right around the time I was like, I'd love to write a book about cult cinema of some sort. Canon was on my head, but I didn't think anybody would read it in the era of the internet, when anyone would go on Wikipedia or IMDb and get stories. I just didn't think there was a market for a cult film guide. And
dude, there really is, because like you can't, and we say this on the show a lot, you can't rely on the shit that you read. If you go to Wikipedia, it's good to like give you a direction, and you're like, all right, well, here's sort of where I'm looking, but you can't go there for your facts, because you're not going to get a lot of them. There'll be a lot of bullshit.
The greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing people that IMDb trivia was real.
Yeah.
That's because a lot of it isn't. That's something I like to do with this book, is try to clarify a lot of stories, because a lot of them are, crazier than the real story, or a lot of them are not as they've been embellished, especially if Menachem was involved. Menachem Golan would change his stories about how he met Claude Van Damme, and you can read interviews with Menachem over the years, and each story gets crazier and crazier.
What's the most accurate story you heard of that? Because I've heard like 3 different ones. I've heard that he actually kicked him. I heard that he just did the split kick. I heard that he brazed his head. Like, what's the story that you know that's most accurate?
Yeah, well, it's not as exciting as Menachem's version, where he's holding the 2 bowls of soup and he's a waiter in a restaurant and kicks it over his head while not spilling the soup. That's the version that Menachem he continued to embellish until it became that. The true story, is really he just hung out at the Canon offices trying to get a meeting. And when Menachem came in, he recognized them. He had been in some of the Canon movies, Break-In especially, as a background extra.
Great.
He did the trick. And Menachem finally, after he saw these kicks, he's like, fine, this guy's been trying to get a meeting with me. Come on up to my office. And Van Damme starts doing the splits in his office, takes off his shirts, making the muscles and stuff, while Menachem Golan sitting at his desk. And at the time, Menachem had the script for Bloodsport, which he was not really rushing to get made, but he took the script out and was finally found a way to kill two birds with one stone. Fine, we'll sign you up, make this movie. And that's how it happened. Menachem never thought Bloodsport would be the hit, huge major.
Now, is it true the part where, because what I heard about that movie originally was, so they had it done, they finished it, and it was shit. And like Jean-Claude Van Damme took it back and edited it himself and recut the movie together.
He went into the Canon offices and begged them to let him help. And he sat down with one of their house editors and they recut the movie together. So he was, very involved with the editing of Bloodsport himself. The fight scenes, particularly, just making them more visceral and exciting, and adding a lot of the stuff where you see the punch and then you see it at a slightly different speed, or like changing a slightly different angle. Van Damme deserves a lot of credit for really making that movie what it is, this classic. Because he deserves credit as an editor, absolutely. But
glad that's true.
That's Last American Virgin, great soundtrack, but I have to go with Break-In.
Right.
Not just because of your story. I mean, the personal connection is awesome. I was going to ask, while you were talking about it, I was going to ask you if you ever tried breakdancing, because I think anyone who was a kid or young in the 80s tried.
Mark hasn't walked since he tried. He's in a wheelchair now.
Right.
But yeah, you listing those songs, I could hear every one of them in my head singing. So that's the one that connects with me the most, and I have to go with the Break-In soundtrack.